On behalf of the United States 5i Global Economic Summit Incident Response Team, welcome to our current cybersecurity risk assessment on the U.S. Global Economic Summit Network. In preparation of the 5i Global Economic Summit for 2018, the selected U.S. GES IR team members have recently conducted this assessment in an attempt to guard against both internal and external threats that may be presented during this year's summit. Our topics of discussion for this review include the current measures for authentication, authorization, and access control, and common weaknesses residing on the U.S. GES network security infrastructure. We will include categories such as people, technology, and policy. If corrective mitigation of any present weaknesses or vulnerabilities is not conducted prior and during this year's summit, prolonged actions could result in successful exploitation of vulnerabilities on the U.S. GES network. Let's first talk about the methods that our workstations on the U.S. GES network authenticate. Windows machines frequently authenticate onto a network by using Microsoft's LDAP authentication program called Active Directory. Active Directory is run on a Windows server and contains all the configurations and policies for an organization. Users who wish to log into a computer joined to Active Directory will insert their Common Access Card, or CAC, into a slot on the computer, and then a user will enter the PIN associated with the CAC. This employs two-factor authentication because it uses both something the user has and something the user knows. The PIN number decrypts the certificate on the CAC and sends the certificate to the Active Directory domain controller. And once the domain controller verifies the certificate, it sends back a token containing all the permissions that the user holds. And then the user is logged in and connected to the network. After users are authenticated, then they must have specific permissions assigned. The USGES workstations do not currently enforce this method of authentication, and only username and password is required. Once a user is authenticated, he or she is granted a token, or session token. This contains a list of all the permissions a user has. These permissions are controlled by the Active Directory security groups. One user might belong to an IT security group, while another may belong to a Secret Service security group, and each group will contain its own set of permissions. The permissions are set by Group Policy Objects, or GPOs. While Active Directory security groups control who can access resources, GPOs control what resources can be accessed. Single sign-on, or SSO, can extend this Active Directory token for use on websites, file share permissions, and email access. Authorization can only go so far, and access control should be designed at a higher level to decide permissions. Working in conjunction with authentication and authorization measures are access control policies. According to NIST IR 7316, access control is concerned with determining the allowed activities of legitimate users, mediating every attempt by a user to access a resource in the system. The objectives of an access control system are often described in terms of protecting system resources against inappropriate or undesired user access. There are three major types of access controls. The first being discretionary access control. This form of control restricts access to objects based on subject identity. The second form of control is called mandatory access control, in which access control policy decisions are made by a central authority. The third access control policy is called role-based access control, in which decisions are made based on the role of the individual user in the organization. Strong access control policies serve to mitigate personnel weaknesses. In regards to personnel weaknesses, The human factor is often the most difficult to manage. Users sometimes circumvent security to gain admin access. This access can be exploited by attackers to gain privileged access to the computer. Sharing passwords is another weakness in personnel. Users may share their passwords with others who they think are trustworthy when anyone could be listening. Information disclosure is when a user accidentally or intentionally divulges information about a system that could help an attacker gain some ground during the attack. Insider threats are malicious users inside your organization. They could be waiting to sell the confidential information or relay it to their own home country. Weaknesses in personnel are best mitigated by having strong technologies that can be utilized against user weakness, such as two or multi-factor authentication. Another very harmful weakness to the organizational network includes a lack of proper technical defenses. Technology weaknesses present a formidable challenge to an organization when attempting to secure their network from intrusion and other forms of attacks. The lack of intrusion detection or intrusion prevention systems that produce signature and heuristic-based alerts can enable attackers to insert known malicious software on an organizational network. Intrusion prevention systems have the capability to block incoming malicious traffic once identified and outbound malicious traffic attempting to call back to its command and control servers. Firewalls that are misplaced or misconfigured present a weakness as well, since they can block known bad IPs or unwanted packets that exceed limited thresholds, deterring denial of service attempts. At the organizational web server, the proxy server can allow whitelisted URLs and block blacklisted URLs and IPs. Lacking a web proxy can open up the organization to web-based attacks or allow access to known malicious sites. In a corporate or government environment, the use of unauthorized software presents a weakness, as the content of the software is either unknown or known to contain vulnerabilities. Similarly, the lack of software patching unauthorized software also presents an avenue for attackers to exploit known or zero-day vulnerabilities. In summary, the lack of any of these discussed assets presents a weakness to the defense-in-depth structure involved in securing information systems and organizational networks. Technology has to be backed by policy, so strong policies drive secure technologies. The first challenge that comes to mind with this weakness in policies is enforcing these policies on elected delegates, who will not likely consider the cyber implications of their actions. User training will also be difficult because it will be unlikely to get users properly trained during the limited time of the summit. The policies in place at the conference must be rectified with the international laws that govern the location of the summit. Jurisdiction will also be difficult, as incident response and investigations may be handled by law enforcement of another country. Lastly, the conference will have limited time to onboard users, and no ability to onboard the users for the other nations. This will become important when trying to determine the source of the attack. In line with determining the source of these attacks is the concern for attribution. The attempted exploitation of the described weaknesses is an ongoing concern for the US GESIR team. The proactive attempts on government and US organizational information systems can normally be attributed to nation states, primarily, but not exclusively, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Advanced malware such as the LoJack rootkit and Ocean Salt can be attributed to Russia and Chinese hacker groups. Virtually all of these countries attempt distributed denial of service attacks on US government and corporate organizations. One of the primary attack vectors is the use of social engineering tactics, such as phishing, to prey upon human weakness. Other forms of malicious attacks, such as spyware and ransomware, can also be attributed mostly to Russia and China due to either nation-state organization groups or organizational cyber criminals that prey upon weaknesses in U.S. government and residential information systems. Our goal is to protect against these forms of exploitation. The USGS IR team has conducted a recent vulnerability assessment to concur. The vulnerabilities that need to be addressed based on our created vulnerability matrix are unpatched operating systems, which should be mitigated by establishing a patching policy, weak passwords and one-factor authentication, which can both be taken care of by two-factor authentication or multi-factor, spam and phishing, which should be mitigated by setting up email filters, and the lack of intrusion prevention and intrusion detection systems should be mitigated with a strong intrusion prevention system. Improper sanitation of media can be mitigated by following the DoD 5220.22 standard for media erasure. Unhardened operating systems and group policies can be mitigated by applying the NIST guidelines. Improper access controls can be mitigated by adding proper access controls. Since industrial control systems have so many vulnerabilities, the best mitigation for them is to segregate them on their own VLAN, and if practical, segregated from the internet entirely. Lastly, third-party software tools are potentially vulnerable and should be mitigated by running them in a sandbox environment. This concludes our current risk assessment of the USGS network infrastructure. If you have any questions on our review assessment, please send your inquiries to the USGS IR team email address at questions@usgesirt.gov. Thank you.